Hello, everyone. This is Will from Impactopia. For our second episode of our podcast, we are going to talk about a new type of structure between DAOs and co-ops, the Distributed Cooperative Organization. And my guest today to talk about it is Irene from the Disco Co-op. Hello, Irene. Welcome here. Thanks for taking the time to talk to us. I'm very happy that we can talk about Disco Co-op. So, Irene, what would you like to tell us about you as a quick introduction?
Okay, thank you very much for having us here and for having me here today. Um, what can I say about myself? I'm a very curious person and someone that has always been very interested in the impact of technology in people in the workplace. And I've got a mixed background of social science, economics, European policies, and I've always worked on technology. I've always worked on the technology development applied to industry. So that's a little bit about me. I'm one of the four worker owners of disco.coop. Disco.coop is a non-profit cooperative based in Spain, but we operate at a global level. Disco is also a very large and comprehensive initiative that looks into workplace practices and brings a framework for working in ways that are different, are open, are cooperative, are feminist, and are commons oriented. The project is has a different areas of development. So there is a governance side of it, developing governance tools for self-managed groups. There is a part that develops technology. There is a part that works with communities directly, and in a co-creation conversational mode, we learn from each other. We put some ideas in front of them, and they implement them and refine and give input to both the governance and the requirements for the technology. That's Disco in a nutshell, I suppose. Disco as an initiative was born out of practice. This is important. Disco, actually, we didn't say this will, but Disco stands for Distributed Cooperative Organizations. So that's the name of the initiative, Distributed Cooperative Organizations. Distributed versus decentralized. And I'm sure we will touch about that later in the conversation. But Disco emerges from practice it has emerged from the practices of a group of translators called Guerrilla Media Collective. And those very brave, very smart, very cool people and friends started practicing and starting trying new working practices in this spirit of open cooperativism and digital cooperativism and feminist economics and implementing open value accounting and looking to create more open and fairer workplaces and create a livelihood and sustain yourself while you're doing something that you're very passionate about. So in a disco, we talk about value creation alongside three main areas. So the livelihood, work, love work, which is the contribution to the commons, the mission, the passion that the group brings the group together to contribute to. And then a very important part, which is the care practices and how care practices are uh, typically invisible, but are the glue that sustains the group together and make things work really, really well in a really smooth and way while looking after each other and looking after your wider network or your wider group of stakeholders. So maybe as if I say something first, and I think that can bring that idea and others together. So when Guerrilla was making this experimentation with themselves, with the group, and all these practices, what they did, they brought together ideas from the commons and peer-to-peer production space, from open cooperativism, from the more traditional cooperativism, feminist economics, open value accounting, and they put them together. So they made kind of like composted, yeah, all the practices from existing practices and brought them together. That's what made them think about work in that way. So you have a mission, you want to contribute, you have something, a passion that you share, that's the love work. You want to implement care practices and you have to make a living. Yeah, so you have the livelihood and care practices. And that simple but very, what I find personally very powerful idea. So work is not just money, that food on the table. It's more than that. You can bring yourself into the workplace, you can bring your passion and actually make a living out of it. And in that well, that the right to have workplaces where you are seen and your opinion and your values are put on the table as well and taken into account. That's that was the genesis of the whole disco initiative. So guerrilla still is a cooperative that translates and does an amazing work and operates as a disco. But the framework, that was something that emerged and that we are taking in an open fashion to the world. Everything we do in disco is open source and open and to anybody that wants to experiment with it. So in that context, open cooperativism is one of the inspirations and one of the places where the group took ideas to implement in practice. When we talk about it's a feminist economic initiative because it talks about fair distribution of income amongst the group according to needs, and there are various ways of implementing this. We are proposing a set of tools to do this, mainly that are directed by conversations and trust building. The group needs to build a degree of trust to actually be able to implement this type of practices and dynamics. And it's also reflected in the care work practices that we propose are essential part of the model. Workplaces that by design implement care practices that everybody takes part of. So it's not work that is done by a few and that is neglected and is not seen in your day-to-day work practices. And then that is reflected also on salaries and hence the open value accounting. So it counts towards your contribution to the group. These goals are so groups of people under 20 people, and that is a number where trust relationships can be developed and maintained through time. So we humans have a limited capacity to develop trust relationships with large numbers of people. So there is the Dunbar number, and that's what we believe and we propose. And those small groups can actually talk to each other and federate resources and effort, and decisions can be made at that small level and then being taken forward in federation, with a federation approach. Take a self-organized group, yeah, a group of people, a community-based group that has a project, a passion, they're doing something together. They identify a problem that they want to solve by coming together, sharing resources, and doing something that they believe is important, and they also want to actually make a living out of it. But they do acknowledge that without having certain common practices in the group that everybody shares and everybody agrees to, and I'm talking about care practices, the group will not develop the good degree of trust. And by care practices, I mean things like check-ins, for example, check-ins with that provide um, its signal to the group and enough information to the group to understand how you show up today, what are you working on, what are your plans for the day, what type of things are you doing for your well-being. So in Disco, in our club, we have a check-in that it talks about what we did yesterday, how we're showing up today, levels of energy, availability, whatever we want to put on that, under that one, blocks, if any. Blocks can be personal, but can be also work-related dependencies. Uh, Align on well-being, what I'm going to do today as Irene, to look after myself or with others, and then align on gratitude. And gratitude is for us something that help us to, well, to get closer to each other and to feel, being part of this amazing initiative. And that is one of the care practices. But I mean, I know other groups that, I don't know, share cleaning um, duties, if they share
Hmm.
the same physical space. But cleaning duties, if you share the same digital space, when you share folders, produce information, one way of showing care to others is actually structuring the information, not for me to consume it as me with my mental framework, but trying to make it something that everybody can pick up and understand and take forward so they want it to. So care practices can take many different ways, many different forms, and it's the group that decides which are the ones that are appropriate for the group, for the number of people, for the type of work they do, if they are physically distributed, working digitally all the time or not, etc. I think, yeah, I mean it depends. It depends on the group. I can talk about my own experience. I joined Disco 4.5 years ago, and for me, it has been an incredible unlearning process, mind you, and looking at the world in a very different way. So progressing, looking at value production or the creation of value as something that has soul, if you want, and thinking with the lens of love, care, and livelihood. It's how you bring your passion to the workplace, but it's also how you do things in with care. So everything you do, everything you implement within your group, seen through that lens, takes a very different form and meaning that when you are doing just setting up a business or setting up a collective and you're looking at just create money, or yeah, you know what I mean. And it's beautiful how that process gets saved and gets implemented. We see it with the groups that we work with. We have a Disco Labs program, groups and organizations and collectives that are implementing, testing, playing with the disco principles and this framework that I'm starting to introduce to you and to the people that are watching the podcast. And it starts with reading the materials. There is a disco journey. So you want to take the disco journey. You start by getting familiar with, as a group, mind you, not as one individual. So as a group, you get acquaintance with the materials. Start reading the manifesto, the elements, blogs, videos, a little bit. And once the group sees, and actually the groups comes, it's like, yes, we are a disco. We feel that we are doing this already. Yeah, but we need some support. Putting some, like, a wrap around our practices to make them more something we can share widely with other people, newcomers, and that is the process. But first starts with a group that identifies as a self-organized group that wants to operate in this way, understands and has a specific contribution to the commons that they want to do as a group. They want to make a living out of it, and they believe that care is core to the well-being of the group. And then it's an iteration process. So once the group is on board on this, is conversations, is just looking at on a second step at the seven disco principles and going very granular on, for example, care practices. What are the things that we want to implement? How do we implement it? Then seeing examples here and there, creating their own care practices and their own care rhythms. And the same goes for the love work. They might have a passion that is very specific. They want to contribute to the commons in a very specific way, but that can take different shapes and forms, be organized in different ways. It can be, short-term projects. The beauty of this is that you make it a fundamental element of your work practices. It's something that you are contributing proactively towards that, and that also gets reflected in your pay at the end of the month, because the model is not just doing the work that brings money into the group or the sustainability of the group, but it's how the three come together. And
Hmm.
it's a beautiful, I think it's a tough process. It's not easy. It's not easy because it's people, small groups, a lot of conversations. It's not fast. It's slow. You need to bear in mind that not everybody has the same speed. So we talk about vibing together. So processes are about trying to find, what rhythms work best with each other, and trying to get into a rhythm where everybody feels comfortable and not too pressured, and things go smoothly. Not easy, I can tell you, because we are not educated typically to work in this way. So there is I talked before about unlearning. For me has been an unlearning process, coming from a very sort of like productivist type of a way of thinking that still shows in the way I work and in the way I talk. But I'm aware of that.
Okay.
I'm aware of the challenges. Yeah, absolutely. And the reason why is because once you start to think about work in this fashion, and you look at the three main aspects, what I've been discussing, you start sharing a language. You start sharing a language. Yeah, what care is and care practices is, and then you know that you have a commitment and specific contribution to the commons, whatever that is, and you can start actually interacting in a different way. So it's not just flows of it's not about flows of money. It's about flows of value, and the value can have you know different aspects, and that it gets interesting. But it's about developing a common language for people to work together. Federation is the step where these goes start to actually, from their point of view, start creating value along those three value streams, and start exchanging and experimenting with that
Okay.
with those value flows. So open value accounting is applied to the way money is being distributed in this type of groups, and then how the group decides the weights of the different types of work. Yeah. So you imagine that, and this guerrilla, for example, applies this very well from the translation. So there are translations that are made for livelihood. There are translations that are made as contribution to the commons, and those are pure, free, like contribution to the commons, and how different. So let's say that the livelihood, the paid for translations go to pay for the love work and contribution to the commons translations. But at the same time, everybody in the group needs to do a minimum amount of care hours, care practices that keep the group together, and just like it's the glue for the relationships to happen. And that is measured in percentages, and that actually goes at the end of the month, translates into a salary. There is a very interesting there are a lot of interesting areas of research in this space, and there are many people around the world that are doing this. People investigating on governance, and investigating on digital governance, investigating on new ways of doing open value accounting, the new ways of distributing funding, for example, is a very interesting one. Philanthropy around the world is rethinking way of operation, and how can they do things in a more open, transparent, and not just one way, working with communities. And we have some examples of that, thanks to some of the people that help us with the project, and are there building infrastructures that can help with this. But at the level of the group, it's really it's really about understanding where others are in terms of needs, and getting to an agreement that feels fair for everybody, and then going to the next step. And those are arrangements that vary with time, because life is there, and life sometimes doesn't go as planned, and we all have different needs. So operating under this type of feminist economic logic, and applying open value accounting to distribute income, it's very, very new for pretty much everybody. I mean, unless you are in a very in one
Yeah,
of these
progressive. Yeah.
classes, it's not something that you learn in a school, for example. And there is a lot of theory as well, but the implementation, the daily practices are very difficult, and that is something that we are very aware of, and and part of the work we do with the labs is how do we get to the practice of these ideas, because the more we practice and the more examples we can provide to the world. This is an open source conspiracy, project. Like, we put it out on the open, more people use it, et voila. And that's our contribution to the commons. We
Hmm.
help others. Disco, the project. So it's not about me or the other people in the group. Is Disco's a project, puts things out there for others to replicate, iterate, create their own flavor according to their specific circumstances, whether those are digital or hyper local, and geographically bound. And once, well, we hope that enough groups in the world can share this language of commons, and openness and contribution, and there will be it will be much easier to talk about value flow, and not money to pay for my needs. You know what I mean? There is a lot of discussion about the GDP these days, beyond growth and beyond GDP, and how can we
Yeah.
change those. So in the end, the discussion is about value, and it's how citizenship, how we as people, and how we as people that know that there is something out there called workplaces that we are going to have to touch at some point in our lives and enter, can be organized in a different way, and not in ways that are purely economic, but in ways that are caring, that can
Hmm.
contribute, can
And
sustain yourself. So just forget about disco for a moment.
yeah, yeah.
Forget this.
Hmm.
Yeah. So let's
Okay.
say that you and I and a couple of other people share share a passion, share something, and we are super passionate about something very specific, and we know we want to make a contribution to that, and we want to work. But then today we are faced with this choice that is like we have to have a proper job, that pays the bills, and then we can do something that we really like. And what we propose is like, no, actually focus on making that something that you can live on, or live with. So live, how do you say in English, I don't know, but you know what I mean. You do what you like, what your passion is, and actually make a business out of it. But the business side of things is, you mention clients, and you mention products. You develop a product, you develop a service, but your mindset is not one of extractivism or destruction. So
Hmm.
you very carefully think the consequences that your business is going to have, whether for good or for bad, which is not something that is usually done in the business world. And again, business might not be the perfect word, but for the sake of the conversation, it's groups of people, organizations, profit, non-profit, small, oriented to the commons, and then it's, you can design your business to be regenerative and not extractivist, but you need to design it consciously. So we want that this is something that has an impact, we want to measure it. We want to show that there is an impact on what, whatever that is. Guerrilla translation. Impact is amazing stuff translated for free from different languages into Spanish, and because otherwise people wouldn't have access to that knowledge. So it really, and that is an example that can be brought, and we see it in many different spaces. The practice of this with that lens, yeah, of impact and care, brings about very different ways of working, very very different ways of working, and um, your clients, for example, think about public authorities, town halls and towns, and what type of businesses do you want to see delivering local services? You want to see companies that have no interest in doing things well and looking after the communities, or you want to see local businesses that are going to be doing something that has an impact on the day-to-day lives, and they also have a livelihood that they can be encouraged to that through that. So yeah, and the people that want to consume ethically, or the want to consume understanding that they are consuming something that is created by a group of people that has certain values, that would be the case. I don't think I think I mean, this is happening at the moment. We're all more conscious in our choices as consumers, but also as clients. There are many people that will not work with certain organizations because they don't respect some basic,
Hmm.
human values.
Values. Yeah, yeah.
I am absolutely convinced that you can be
Okay.
competitive. It's just that it's not the the conditions to do this are not very easy, and at the moment, incentives, economic incentives, go to organizations that are profit oriented, and there is also a job to do to change mindsets, change minds and hearts of public authorities. They say they have you as public authority have a duty to manage the money that you're getting from me as a taxpayer and from all the other taxpayers to deliver services that are good in many different ways for everybody, and incentivize that type of businesses. That is not common. That's not a mainstream. That's not mainstream practice.
Hmm.
And there is a lot of work in trying to educate policymakers to start implementing degrowth policies and the different flavors and different types of degrowth policies. So, yeah, it's yeah, your
Hmm.
public authorities should build public infrastructures, and for everybody to contribute to and solve problems that we all share. Yeah. Once you start operating in this way, and is that the group takes responsibility for their own livelihood in this compassionate and and commons oriented way, and those are group that stick together even when the circumstances are not the best, and this has happened through COVID, and cooperatives and self-organized groups have maintained the jobs of the people that was in those groups and has maintained the livelihood, taking some very difficult decisions, while other types of organizations have simply, you know, uh, thrown people out, the door, without caring what was going to happen with them and their families. Once you are operating in this way, you take a responsibility for the group. I mean, it's not just me. I'm gonna do. It's like it's a group responsibility. So we talk about resilience as in times of hardship. The group can can configure itself in ways that help them go together through that process, and that is and that's what high level what we mean by economic resistance.
Mm-hmm.
It's also bringing your passion to the workplace. It's bringing your, you can be an activist and you can earn a livelihood, and you don't have to do this on the weekends or in the evenings when you have a normal job. I mean, a normal job. You know what I mean? So it's bringing a different type of workplaces altogether. We need to distinguish two things. I mean, what we are proposing are frameworks and tools and
Mm-hmm. Okay.
methodologies and technology. Now, the legal form that the group decides to take, it's their decision. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
So there are groups that are cooperatives. There are groups that are associations. There are groups that are non-profits. There are groups that are foundations. There are groups that are limited societies. So it's not. So how you want to operate is something that you decide, and it's very important. The cooperative law, it's quite restrictive, and is quite difficult to set up a co-op and to manage a co-op. And we know this by heart because we are a non-profit co-op. It's more difficult to do things with this type of structure than with a limited society, for example. Yeah, it's like rough example. It's more expensive to set up. Just it's it takes a lot more time just to get up and running as a legal organization. For certain things, it's more cumbersome to have this type of legal form, and and it's not as incentivized as other legal forms. Now, there are not as many accelerators or incubators of cooperatives, for example, or platform cooperatives or digital cooperatives than any other legal structure, and that is an issue, and it comes down to the group. I mean, it's more. I believe it's more difficult to help groups of people come together and set up a co-op than one person has an idea, get some money and start paying salaries and getting a group around that. So it's a way of thinking about the group and the relationships and the money and everything. So it's kind of like very different. And of course, you can retrofit. So there is now a very interesting, very strong movement globally for taking an ordinary company and applying these concepts on not only these concepts. I mean, there are other groups in the world, many different people that are actually implementing similar things or think in similar ways and trying to get this type of ideas into existing workplaces and changing them. But starting from scratch is the choice of the group,
Mm-hmm.
and
Okay.
and that takes very different shapes and forms in different parts of the world. We work with people all over the world, and we've seen very different legal forms. Thinking about, so disco is a way of operating, is a way
Mm-hmm.
of approaching working together. Sustainability is something that all discos should have, or you when you operate, whether you're a non-profit, it doesn't matter, but there is some flow of money in the process. Yeah. So talking about sustainability is an essential part of any disco. It has to be part
Okay.
of the group, even if it's voluntary work, pure voluntary work. That is still, it's just because value is time, is people's time that put into a project because they want to. But I think there is. I mean, another. I'm not. I don't want to put words in your mouth, Will. One thing that I perceive talking to people is like these type of ideas, the disco framework, the values, the principles, they're talking about love work and care work and etc. It cannot be profitable. You know what I
Mm-hmm.
mean? You cannot
Yeah,
make
yeah.
money with this. That's not at all what we are implying. We are proposing more human and nature connected ways of working, more regenerative ways of working. Nobody said that you are not going to make money on the process, because that is something that again is the group. The group wants to do a lot of good and a lot of money and distribute it, in a transparent, open way. That is amazing. Yeah. And there are really interesting high tech companies. They don't call themselves discos, but I know they operate in this way. They're developing
Okay.
high tech. They put a lot of money into some really interesting common contribution projects, and they do implement care practices. So they are actually, so they might have a different legal form. They might be perceiving one way or the other, but this is where it goes in. This is what happens inside the organization. So it might not have nothing to do with their, how they portray themselves to the existing business world. Yeah, because this is also, I don't know if you want to talk about this, but like, kind of like the co-ops are in many places perceived as, a little bit naive and fairy tale, not very fashionable. So if you are a young person, an entrepreneur, wants to set up something, a cooperative is not the first thing that comes to mind.
That's true.
Yeah, that's something that is a problem. And that again, this goes to the hearts and minds. How can we change the way people that are studying or that are young and want to start a business, they want to do something. They want to earn money, they want to live, they want to do it in this type of way. They want to share resources, they want to build in community. Uh, what are the options? Can you actually, put those options in front of them? At the moment, that is not being done, not even in the business schools around the world, or they are like discussed in a very, like, it's like, because talking about exclusively about legal forms, it is a bit of a mistake. We are trying to propose new ways of thinking about the economic models. So how can the economy be kind of like different, and treat people more fairly and distribute resources more fairly? But all that starts with people and people's minds and people's perceptions and how they look at the world. So if you look at the world in an extractive way, you're never going to build a regenerative business because it doesn't make sense, because you don't believe.
Yeah.
And the first part is believing in it. Also, I think, we all know that there is a mental health pandemic going on. Mental health was not a topic that was discussed widely, not even 10 years ago. It wasn't an issue. Our perception of the world is changing. And for many of us, it's a struggle. It's like, how do you progress from thinking about profit, and for me to think about, what Bollier and Friedrich call the nested eye. Yeah, how can we be ourselves but also part of different circles and different groups? And that creates a lot of, I think, that and many other things. We are confused as individuals.
Mm-hmm.
There is a lot of work that we need to do at an individual level to be able to operate in a group with the level of trust that is needed to operate in these groups, because you have to leave your ego out of the equation and think about group and think about what can be done together. First of all, I think that talking about COPs and talking about DAOs in the same sentence is not very helpful. I've been in many different conversations about DAOs and about COPs, and there
Mm-hmm.
is doesn't seem to be. I have the feeling that people see this in some sort of like continuum, or we can take COPs and then build DAOs or something like that, how can we take decentralized blockchain technologies and apply them to COPs, And it's again, it's how to approach the what type of communities do we want to build, what type of things do we want to do, why do you want to build a a decentralized autonomous organization? What is the purpose of that? What type of people you want to bring in? And when you talk about economic incentives, again, you fall in the same trap of economic incentives are all very good, but how do you make decisions in an automated way with no human intervention? I've worked in a number of Web3 projects, and I find fascinating asking this the question of, oh, we are building XYZ. Oh, that sounds really interesting. What is it for? Oh, and prodding on that point is like, no, but we are building a technology to do, okay, to do what? To make things faster, to make, and again, there is kind of like a confusion, building trustlessness environments. Who wants to operate in a trustlessness environment? I mean, from a human values point of view, can you put all your trust in a trustless technology? Care cannot be care cannot be coded. It's care practices cannot be something that you automatize or something that you have to live and you have to discuss. But of course, the way technology can help here, technology is a tool. Technologies are amazing tools to do things in ways that can support human human nature and help people self-organize and be more aware of the stuff that they are doing. So what we are proposing is building open technologies that groups can use to visualize and understand the health of the organization. So if you think of the livelihood, the love, and the care work as buttons in a music you know
Hmm. Yeah,
thing,
equalizer.
yeah, and on an equalizer, yeah, you can actually start moving them
Hmm.
around. So you record your time. We propose that people actually record the time that they spend in the different activities associated to the different work streams, and then you see immediately as a person, as a worker, if you are actually doing what you said you were going to do. One of
Yeah.
the most difficult things in this type of groups is keeping motivation and work rhythms stable. Yeah, because people tend to forget or tend to get discouraged if they don't see others working, and it's kind of like it's difficult. So the technology that we want to build and put out there has to be fun, has to be visual, and has to help with this keeping the group together, understanding the each person's contribution and the level of health of the group. We don't propose the use of blockchain for everything. It's like, but we are studying what set of technologies and infrastructures we need to bring together, because this is an exercise of actually bringing together different types of open source solutions in a creative, fun, and playful way. And the what was the question, Will?
What about the disco cat, the use of the
Sorry, yeah.
blockchain?
So the disco cat stands for community algorithmic trust, and it's when the technology actually help keep the commitments that the group has made together. We talk about commitment statements. So every 3 months, we have a piece of paper that is actually a commitment statement. I then commit to sustain these rhythms, do this, work this number of hours, produce these outputs, da, 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 da. So contribute. My care practices are going to be X. My love work is going to be, yeah. And every 3 months, we review that. Have we done it? Not. And how do we do that? We do that with data. So we input time according to the three value streams. What we are building visualizes that. We also want to make the disconomics, the economic model proposal for people that are not economically literate, that might have some traumas with money or with finances, that and make it something that is digestible, because that distributes the power in the collective. So if someone does all the numbers, has an unfair share of the responsibility, but also holds all the say power when it comes to make decisions, because he's probably the only person that understands the economic situation of the group, for example. Yeah, that creates massive tensions. So try to provide tools that can make that more useful and easy, and reduce the stress around that part of a business. The operational part of a business is very important, but also gives tools that make transparency something tangible. Yeah. And the community algorithmic trust in the end is a piece of AI that helps the group manage the data and visualize it and create the accounts for the
Hmm.
district. And that's the value, and the value how can flow between one group and a different group and a different group. So it becomes, it's got a digital footprint, and with that you can start doing the movements of the different types of values. So that is also something that, so in a tokenized environment, but at the heart is the group and the people and conversations and decisions and humans and slowness. Yeah, and the technology helps those groups be more aware, self-aware of the work they're doing, understand better, and actually it helps reduce conflict, because nobody has to be chasing another one, or you haven't done this, who is accountability, and helping with that. So we are proposing that the tools also help with that. Is something that we are designing, is something that we are discussing with the groups that are working with our more closely,
Hmm.
with labs that are iterating the model and that are looking at how to implement first governance to be able to provide input to the technology. In the past, we've had some bad experiences with tech people that have come to work with us, and they thought that they had all the answers before actually understanding
Uh,
practices. Very painful process, because in this particular place, so technology is really is a support tool. It's never going to be the dominant part of the equation. It really is not. So yeah.
hmm.
So after the manifesto was launched a year later, we published the Elements, which is a version of the work that we are doing, introducing some new elements as to how can we contribute to policy making. So thinking about this type of the growth ideas and how can they support the emergence of discourse and support the the sustainability of discourse too. And now we are designing the pink paper, and the pink paper is going to be a white paper, technical paper with the with the proposal that we want to see and want to build for discourse to operate in the ways that I've been
Hmm.
describing
Yeah.
until now. And that is something that our internal deadline is the end of this year, at least to have it quite advanced. And we're gonna hold some internal events with key people that gonna help us to bring this
Hmm.
to reality. We are four, and we work with a
Hmm.
number of collaborators,
Okay. All
external
right.
collaborators. We as a co-op use a number of open source digital tools. That is what we want to bring together under a more visually interesting and automated. So what we want is to automate all the data inputs that we are already putting forward, and get rid of Excel spreadsheets and tools like that, because it makes things very difficult. Also, the interface. I mean, there are a couple of things that I would like to say about the model. So one is the interface with the legal and financial existing infrastructure. So once you operate in this way, it makes it quite difficult to operate in a, you know, in the existing, just paying taxes. What do it's the day-to-day business, legal and financial business aspects are something that more work needs to be done, because being very new is very difficult to find people that can help you to make that translation. So in the end, it's kind of like a translation. So that is one thing, and the other one is that so in a disco is not a DAO. So DAOs are decentralized autonomous organizations. What we propose is that the organizations, distributed cooperative organizations, the ways of working that I've been describing during this time, uh, implemented in a small group. So it would change the way DAOs at the moment operate, or they could, try to implement some of the ideas we propose. So we are talking to people that are really interested in this space. And for example, conflict is something that emerges very regularly in the DAO space. Conflict. So conflict resolution is something that is much needed. If you implement framework, you look at a DAO with the disco lens, you start looking at things that might contribute to create environments where conflict can be anticipated and can be actually managed. Sorry. So we were talking about things like care squads, and having a small group of people that is proactively in the community trying
Hmm.
to identify and prevent and help solve conflict in a healthy manner. Conflict is not a bad thing, but it needs to be managed in a non-violent manner. Otherwise, can be super toxic for the group. So ideas like that can be implemented very very quickly, and then refining the the ideas around sustainability, not just economic incentives, but having other incentives that can be very commons oriented. So, what is the specific commons contribution and how that gets measured by the group? I think the world is changing, and we need to encourage this type of self-organized groups to take more. I think people should be a bit more aware of the power they have if they work in groups, in communities, and that they actually can, and they can change the way things are where they are. And that is a beautiful message to take,
Hmm.
and not thinking that because a small group can do a lot of really interesting things, and a lot of good. So I would love to see millions of discos, and populating the discoverse and operating at hyperlocal and digital environments, talking this language of care, love, and sustainability, uh, and operating and running, the places where we inhabit and the planet. Wouldn't that be beautiful?
Thanks again, Irene, and thanks everyone. See you next
Thank you.
episode. Bye bye.